the greatest showman, you know, and after him inspire a generation of pianists. So here we go. Right. Liszt and an introduction to Romanticism. So here we go. Franz Liszt. According to all reliable sources, Liszt was the first true celebrity pianist in the history of Western art music. He was the embodiment of the Romantic era. The sublime and the ridiculous, you know, because in the Romanticism, there is the emphasis on the two extreme, the diabolical and the virtuous. So if you think of Liszt's work, someone who can write Mephisto Waltz on one hand can also write Benediction de Dieu on the other hand, the transcendental and the mediocre. So his works, I must say, for someone who can write the Année de Pèlerinage, you know, and the B minor sonata and transcendental etudes, also write some pretty horrific stuff, such as the Hungarian Rhapsody, some of the Hungarian Rhapsody, and the operatic transcription, which, you know, doesn't do himself any favors. And no other composer in the 19th century has as diverse of a compositional output. Now, if you think of someone like Chopin, who's also wrote a lot of his output, also wrote for piano, Chopin is quite different from Liszt, because, you know, what Chopin wrote, it's, you know, quite exclusive, but, you know, a lot of what Chopin wrote, it's good, a lot of like meaningful stuff. Whereas Liszt tends to fluctuate between the really banal circus music and to the really, really, you know, sublime stuff. I mean, I don't want to dwell too long on this, but I heard this piece by Liszt played by one of my favorite pianists, Georges Boulez, the other day. It's, I think it's a fantasy on themes from Beethoven's Ruin of Athens or something, you know, and it's actually, I actually can't believe what I've heard that, you know, I mean, that's just one of the worst pieces I've ever heard in my life. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Right, we move on. Liszt's physical beauty, musical gift, and striking stage persona combined for intoxicating cocktail of the visionary, genius, sex, lust, snobbery, vanity, religion, and literature. So in short, he was Faust, Mephisto, Casanova, Byron, Mazeppa, and St. Francis all in one. So in other words, he actually doesn't know who he is. So he has all this personality, if you can put it that way. Had cyberspace and social media existed in the 19th century, the tagline for Liszt would have been hashtag sex, hashtag drugs, and back then drugs wouldn't be weed or whatever, it probably will be opium, hashtag classical music, and hashtag Franz Liszt. Okay, that's just my opinion. Right. Liszt on the piano, here we go. Liszt was the first musician, like Dr. Utomo said, to have the piano placed in profile, so that the audience will be able to see his piano expression. Now, you have to remember that in 19th century, in 18th century, a lot of the time when soloists perform, their back faces the audience. So Liszt was the first to turn the piano sideways so you can actually see his face, you know. He was also the first composer to perform from memory, flouting the traditional view that performing music without perform without music is a sign of disrespect to composer. In fact, that actually created a problem, like Liszt said many years ago. Now that after Liszt, all pianists decides to play from memory. And Liszt actually came out and said that that actually could be a problem, really, because the reason why he performed from memory is when he plays his Hungarian Rhapsody, for example, there are a lot of leaps and, you know, a lot of octaves. So he has to look for his fingers. But he, you know, he felt that had unwillingly, you know, given the next generation a sort of problems that to perform from memory. So in my opinion, I mean, it's a subject that we speak about a lot. You know, I don't care if you perform from memory or you perform from music. I think at the end of the day, you just have to be convincing in your performance. Now, let me show you this. This is actually quite an interesting picture. The artist Joseph Dan Houter's 1840 depiction of Liszt performing for Alexandre Dumas. That's Alexandre Dumas. So he wrote the Count of Monte Cristo and the Three Musketeers. Okay, George Sand. That's George Sand. I'm sure everyone knows who George Sand. George Sand is actually a woman, but she changed her name into a man's name to get her writings published, she was Chopin's mistress. I'm not sure whether or not she had a fling with Liszt, but that maybe that's a subject for another time. Okay, so that's Liszt. Countess Marie d'Argoul, who was Liszt's first important mistress, and she gave Liszt 3 children. I think one of them died. And in fact, Liszt traveled Europe extensively with Countess Marie d'Argoul, and that is where he wrote the first 2 books of the Année de Pèlerinage, which I think, well, initially they were called The Voyage of the Young, and then they were later revised to become the Année de Pèlerinage, which is some of Liszt's greatest and most autobiographical works, musical works. Now, this fat guy over here, no, I don't want to say fat, that's bad. This big guy over here is Rossini. Everyone knows who Giacomo Rossini here. And that is Niccolo Paganini. Yeah. And that is Lord Byron. And Lord Byron, of course, is very important in, Liszt's work. Of course, Liszt wrote his 4th transcendental study, Mazeppa, after Byron's poem, inspired by Byron's poem. In fact, Liszt wrote that 7 times, wrote the subject matter of Mazeppa fascinates Liszt 7 times that he wrote it. No, the subject matter of Byron's Mazeppa fascinated Liszt so much, but Liszt wrote 7 versions of Mazeppa, and some of the first 3 versions were the transcendental studies. Okay. And here are some caricatures of Liszt playing the piano, how people see, he plays the piano with lots of hands, because basically people have not seen, before Liszt, people have not seen showmanship or piano playing that's like that, Okay. And then there's more caricatures of Liszt, as you can see here. He's very flamboyant, character. Does it remind you of any 20th century pianist? I'll leave that to your sort of imagination. I don't want to say too much. One has to be careful what one says on social media these days. Everything is recorded. Okay, here we go. As a composer, Liszt's output consists of over 1,000 works, and until today, only the Australian pianist Leslie Howard has recorded all of Liszt's piano works for Hyperion. So there's over 100 CDs if anyone's interested, to listen to all of Leslie Howard's recording. I mean, it's quite a project to be honest, to record. I don't know, 3 versions of the Dante Sonata and all 3 versions of the Transcendental Studies. I have nothing but admiration for that. Life is too short, in my opinion. Really, I played the final versions. I think that's for like most of us, but that's Mr. Howard obviously felt that that's his calling, and that's fine with me. Liszt's one-movement symphonic poems, as well as many of his late piano works, like Neue Grise and all this stuff, were seen by many as works which were to have significant influence in the next generation of composers. Some argue that Liszt's experimental use of harmonies, in particular in the late works, were prophetic in their foreshadowing of atonality, paving the ways for the works of Stravinsky, Debussy, and Schoenberg in the early part of the 20th century. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay. Now we go into popular culture, which is one of my favorite, subjects, because I love movie. Liszt's life and music have been the subjects of numerous films, the adaptation. Charles Vidal's Song Without End, won an Academy Award for Best Music Score, as well as the Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture. I think that's Dirk Bogarde and that's Genevieve Page. And excuse me, the pianist, it's actually soundtrack pianist, is actually George Bolet, the Cuban pianist, one of the greatest Liszt performer, and not just a wonderful Liszt performer, fantastic 19th century performer of 19th century romantic music, especially transcriptions. If you don't know George Bolet, then I recommend you to go and YouTube his 1974 live recording from the Carnegie Hall, where he plays all the Chopin preludes, amongst other things. Then there is that magnificent recording of the Liszt Wagner Tannhäuser, or Wagner Liszt Tannhäuser overture, as well as the Schütz Evler Blue Danube Waltz, which is extraordinary. Okay, right. Now this is a bit of a weird film, and there's some weird pictures here. Okay, now I have to show you this. Ken Russell, he is an English director. I think, I'm quite sure he is. Now his film Listomania is based on the novel Nelida, written by Liszt's first important mistress, the Countess Marie d'Argoult. I've seen the film. The film is actually really bizarre, and it's not particularly good, but it's actually quite controversial. And it was notorious for its reimagining of Wagner. Now, Wagner became, of course, Liszt's, I can't remember, I think, what is the connection between Wagner and Liszt? I have to,
His
yes?
daughter, right?
Yes, you're right. You're right. Liszt, one of Liszt's daughter, married Wagner. So actually, Liszt became Wagner's father-in-law. Thank you, Dr. Tomo. So this film was notorious for its reimagination of Wagner as a vampire. Okay, and it's actually true. There was a part where Wagner, it was actually the scene that these are meant to be the Rhine maidens from the Ring. The first scene of Rhine, and that's meant to be the Rhine girl, and then Wagner came in and then sucked the blood out of these Rhine maidens. So it's actually really weird, but I don't want to talk about it. I mean, go and watch the film if you want. I'm sure you can find it somewhere on Google. And its use of giant phalluses, reminiscence of Japan's Shinto Kanamara Matsuri. So again, it's all there, so if you wanted to Google what's Japan's Shinto Kanamara Matsuri is about, then go ahead, so here we go. Just to you, so that you guys also know, Ken Russell has this particular fascination of a lot of composers, and he also made a film about Tchaikovsky called The Music Lovers, which is also horrific. And he also made one about Mahler. I think he wrote quite a lot of films about composers. But the problem I find with Hollywood directors or general directors writing scripts about musicians is that most of the time they don't have an idea of what's going on in the musician's head. So a lot of the time it's really bad. I'm not sure if anyone here has seen that movie called Whiplash about that came out a few years ago about a drummer at a jazz school. So I mean, I watched the film and I hated every moment of it. I mean, it goes against what my feelings of how to be a good teacher, really. Anyway, but that's again another subject for maybe afterwards. Right. And here we go. I'm sure you guys all know who this is. One of the 20th century's greatest pianists, Sviatoslav Richter, played the role of Franz Liszt in the 1952 Russian movie called The Composer Glinka. It's actually quite funny. Liszt, Richter actually had long hair. He actually wore wig, and when he was playing the role of Liszt. And then everyone knows this, of course, this is the famous one. Liszt's second Hungarian Rhapsody in C-sharp minor was immortalized by the evergreen animated duo of Tom and Jerry in the Cat Concerto. So I mean, a lot of people are probably, some of our viewers here might be too young, but go and YouTube the Cat Concerto or Liszt's second Hungarian Rhapsody, Tom and Jerry, and yeah, and I think that's about it. I have recommended listening list here, but these are just my opinion. Don't take me, don't take my word for it. Some people are all Leslie Howard, so, and that's fine. As you can see, these are some of my opinion, some of Liszt's great works. And then so with who I think are, I wouldn't say definitive recording, but like noteworthy recording, in my opinion. So. And I think that is Liszt for you, the overall view of Liszt.